Out of all the channels centered around dissociative identity disorder on YouTube, DissociaDID is probably the worst possible representative of that community. I highly recommend never watching any of their videos on the platform. But first, a word from our sponsors. This video was brought to you by John Q Fake Names Victorian Streetlight Company. Wait, you're big enough to get sponsors now? What are you talking about? I haven't even hit the record button yet. Your memory is faulty either way. You must have dreamed it up. Go back to bed. The mental health space on YouTube is definitely underserved at best. Besides your favorite YouTuber explaining that they haven't been uploading for a while because they've had depression, or they're finally getting treatment for, well, insert condition here, there's honestly not much. Maybe a few channels, but they're more self-help than anything, and their view counts aren't great as a rule. Plus half of them look like they should have been bullied in high school. Enter DissociaDID.
Hello everybody!
For those of you who don't know, DissociaDID is a YouTube channel run by one person with dissociative identity disorder. In it, they've dedicated their channel to, and I quote, breaking the stigma around dissociative identity disorder, I'm calling it DID from now on, just a heads up, and other trauma-based mental illnesses, and providing education through supportive and informative content, yada yada yada, and well, I'm gonna have to stop right there. You see, DissociaDID, while claiming to be an educator, is anything but. There are 3 reasons that come to mind immediately. Firstly, they spread mental health statistics that are simply untrue. Furthermore, they support self-diagnosis as a valuable tool. Another thing that shows that their educational value is questionable at best is that they represent their personal experience with the disorder as the norm. They grossly misrepresent the prevalence of DID in the world population at large. They like to say that
DID affects between 1 and 3% of the population.
Somewhere between 1 and 3% of the population.
More common than schizophrenia.
Not as rare as people think.
More common than schizophrenia. Exactly the same percentage of the population has red hair. Just as common as bulimia.
Meanwhile, the real prevalence of DID in the population is at least an order of magnitude less than that. And, well, they may just have bad statistics, which happens, but like, if your job is to educate, wouldn't you want to be accurate? And if you aren't going to put in any effort to correct this, should people really take you seriously as an educator? It gets even worse when you consider their advice on seeking mental health treatment.
How can I bring DID up to my therapist? I feel like she won't believe me. Explain to them your symptoms. Don't mention DID. Just say like, I've seen other people who have similar symptoms. What disorders do you know that match these symptoms? If they don't bring up DID, just say like, multiple personality disorder thing. And then if she's like, oh, that's now called dissociative identity disorder, this is what it is, then you know that they're either uneducated or controlled by their stigma.
And that's on the off chance that you use the information you got from their channel to decide that you need a professional diagnosis. That's right, they're a fan of the Twitter kitties method of diagnosis. DissociaDID wrote an article in the UK publication Mental Health Today defending, you guessed it, the value of self-diagnosis. But don't worry, it's only for a starting point, because you might otherwise have to wait to get an appointment with a therapist. Interestingly enough, 3 business days later, an article by a licensed psychiatrist makes the exact same point that I'm making. A small cough seems like something minor until you get to WebMD. The same thing is prevalent among people who self-diagnose. The psychiatrist argues that information on specific conditions is often inaccurate to one's specific circumstances and can cause more harm than good. And this argument quite frankly holds water. In high school, most of us knew at least one person who was clearly suffering, yet had a new diagnosis every week without ever going and figuring out what was wrong. And for an audience that is almost assuredly made mostly of high schoolers, I mean just look at the comments, this is actively harmful. Now you might say, oh well, their fault for getting mental health advice from a YouTube person. And I mean, you'd be right. But the education tagline and the same 5 academic papers that used to be in the video descriptions make it more likely for a hypothetical teen to take YouTube mental health person as an authority on the topic. Especially detrimental to their ability to be an educator is the fact that they represent their personal experience as the quote-unquote normal experience of someone with DID. And from what I've read, both about symptoms on Wikipedia and accounts of other DID systems online, the way DissociaDID's DID manifests itself is very out of the ordinary. All their ultras are very distinct from one another, and when they switch, it's very visible and noticeable. Furthermore, they have misrepresented the nature of their condition. On Twitter, they said that ultras are different people and should be treated as such, when this is simply untrue. An ultra is described as a separate personality state, not a separate person. They also present it as something easy and simple to live with, which most other systems I've seen online vehemently disagree with. But you don't have to take my word for it. There wouldn't necessarily be anything wrong with this if they presented it as a sort of, these are my experiences as a person with DID, Follow me on my journey, instead of I am an educator, which it used to be, I am a professional. Literally, they've said that they've considered themselves to be an equal in the field to actual licensed psychiatrists. Okay. Because these videos of DissociaDID doing random things are severely lacking in the realm of truly educational content, what we have here is a mislabeled vlog channel. Okay, what does that have to do with anyone except for a couple misguided teens? Yeah, audience strawman, you're right. A mislabeled channel isn't the end of the world. We should just let them be until they figure it out. Okay, before I get any further in, I'd like to remind you that this is a video about mental health people, so please consider this a content warning. If you have unresolved issues or traumas that you really should go work through with a psychiatrist, you might not want to continue. Anyways, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Keep in mind that we've established that Nin isn't anywhere near a good educator. But unfortunately, it turns out Nin isn't that great of a person either. Nin has proven herself to be a bad player in the DID community, and abusive and manipulative to both her friends, I use this term loosely, and audience. Not only is this the case, she has proven herself to be racist and evasive when pressed about it. Side note, can big YouTubers stop having racism controversies? Seriously, every time I read or watch a video about a YouTuber who's been controversial or who's had issues, there's unresolved racism controversies in the past. Can y'all be more creative with what you do wrong? Like, go to fraud oh wait, DissociaDID does that. Or like defend oh wait, I said I wasn't gonna talk about that one in this video. Look, the point is racism is terribly uncreative and I want to cover more interesting stuff. Here are a few examples of her bad behavior. Let me start with the boring stuff first. So basically, some of the alters are, and I quote, different races. Now you may see the issue with this logic. If not, don't worry, some minorities with DID saw the problem and did what you do. Say, you know, that's not cool. And so she apologized and promised to make a video listening to minority creators and owning up to her mistakes. Of course, this was bad, all said on Tumblr, and if you look for said video on the YouTube channel, it's not there. No, it wasn't deleted. If it was, I'd be able to find an archive. Somehow it never managed to be made at all. It's almost like that apology was worthless, made only to shut critics up temporarily on the way to more clout. The deletion of the Tumblr would definitely suggest so. Like I said, terribly uncreative and unsurprising. But wait, there's more! They've claimed one of their alters, Amira, is Indian, and this part literally happened. They used an Indian accent in one of their videos.
Alters such as dog alters may have been created when a child who was abused. It is not unusual for children who are abandoned or neglected to be starved.
Now, Nin tried to wave this off on Instagram as, I don't know anyone with an Indian accent. Anyways, it was because of echolalia. I'll just give you the dictionary definition of echolalia and let you form your own conclusions. Oh yeah, back in June when the police murdered George Floyd, Nin posted some ooh kind words of support on Instagram. Of course, these posts rang a bit hollow with some people after the previous incidents, and so they helpfully pointed this out. Nin took it well. By well, I mean deleting their comments and calling them aggressive. And on top of all this, she's posted a video where for at least one segment, she goes on and on fetishizing people with brown skin, and it's just really weird. It makes me uncomfortable to watch this.
Dark skin is beautiful. So damn pretty. One of my friends is mixed race, and actually two of my friends are mixed race. This applies to both of them. One of them's half Japanese, half English, and one of them is half Caribbean. I can't remember specifically where. And they have the most gorgeous coffee-colored skin, so pretty. And then the half Japanese girl has like a tan color, like it's not dark, but it's tan, and she's just so beautiful. The boy who's half Caribbean, so gorgeous. When I was younger, before I knew about racism and stuff like that, I know village, but I'm talking about like young, like 6 or so. I always wanted to have dark skin because I thought it was really pretty.
Y'all are lucky I can't animate because my doodles would be doing the biggest of eye rolls right now. Okay, the boring part is done, but I am nowhere near done with examples. The more research I did, the worse the behaviors that I found got. As it turns out, once upon a time, DissociaDID wasn't alone. They had a healthy lineup of other DID creators to collab with, interact with, and even sleep over with. Meet Bobo and Co, Multiplicity and me, Axolotls in a trench coat, and I forget. Look, all you need to know about them is that they got played! Not really their fault or anything, cause what can you do when someone seems to be sincere in all their interactions with you? So, they decided to have a sleepover, all of them, and it was uneventful. They got a few vlogs out of it. Axolotls in a trench coat over here gets accused of sexual harassment. and I'm gonna simplify because it's not actually important for this video. Long story short, the other creators that went to the sleepover got ghosted, and they kinda compared notes and went, wait a minute, we all kinda got used, because their common experience was literally that. DissociaDID acting like a friend and then being weirdly dismissive and uncaring, ghosting them, etc. Anywho, the moral of this story is that other, much better DID creators exist, and you should definitely go watch them instead of DissociaDID. But that's only about how they treat their friends. Turns out, Nin treats the fans even worse. With the audience, it's all about getting money. Well, usually. Sometimes it's about trivializing mental health. DissociaDID was involved in drama earlier this year that I told myself I wasn't gonna talk about. So I won't. Point is, they were in drama and the internet kinda did its thing looking for stuff to talk about, and Nin deemed this to be harassment and posted about a suicide attempt to quote-unquote teach the trolls that their actions have consequences. This is textbook emotional abuse. Now, if you want to tell me that a mental health educator isn't supposed to know better, be my guest. Seriously, I want you to try and make that make sense in the comments. While you work on that essay, I'll be busy listing more examples of how Nin acts when the cameras aren't rolling. Next up is, oh, would you look at that? More manipulation! Nin's also cribbed the I'm so broke routine from Shane Dawson.
Take my used Jeep and go over to Jeffrey's house to see his hot pink everything.
We make at least one thing a month that is suggested by our patrons, and that's really helpful for us because it helps keep a roof over our heads.
Yeah, like a big fancy Mexican restaurant. I am poor.
Thank you for subscribing. Please join our patrons so we can pay our bills.
Where you cry poverty despite, well, not actually being poor. Nin takes this a step further though, guilt-tripping the audience into paying for DissociaDID's Patreon because, plus I can't eat or pay rent or get medical treatment if I don't get Patreon money. Which flat out isn't true. I'm gonna get to that later. I mean, she had people overdrawing their bank accounts, which, well, I mean, it's not a smart move on their part, but to just sit there and rake in that money and say nothing? That's such predatory behavior and I am legitimately disgusted. Most big YouTubers have better morals than just stealing via Patreon. That is low. And it gets even lower. This channel is a gaslighting emporium. DissociaDID, the system as a whole, is a master of turning any criticism they receive into them being attacked or otherwise the victim in any situation. The earlier accusations of racism, she posted links. How dare you keep on cyberbullying? Or you bring up that they could have acted kinder / done better in the past and now you're making them relive trauma or you're being hurtful. Furthermore, they've tried to make their own DissociaDID community and tell their stands to just ignore the drama, it's not real, instead of apologizing for, well, if I listed everything, we'd be here all day, and that is a lot of editing time. This shouldn't work though, it's the internet. Multiple people have had things to say about the drama, and surely people would have found out, right? Wrong! You'll notice that the only ways to directly interact with them are Instagram, Patreon, and YouTube. 3 platforms that all have one trait in common. That's right, the ability to delete comments. So anything that isn't effusive support is just instantly deleted. Speaking of Patreon, one thing's for certain, during all their time on YouTube, the DissociaDID channel has been great at earning money. Remember how I mentioned that Nin isn't anywhere close to poor? Nin has more revenue streams than creators with years on the platform could even dream of. Let's start with something tame, AdSense revenue. They make bank, and that's even according to Social Blade metrics, which, you gotta trust me here, lowball pretty much every non-gaming channel out there. How do I know? I'll let you figure that one out. So the channel brings in a solid amount of money, more than enough to live on. Plus they've been taking brand deals as of recently and even had a sponsored podcast. There's also their merch, which is spread across 3 websites and quite frankly it's pretty lazy. Just a couple articles of clothing with the logos on them or this ultrasound series, so I'm gonna assume that the merch isn't too profitable. And over $15,000 in donations on Ko-fi. Still somewhere north of $60,000 a year on the low end. So I guarantee you that they weren't hurting for money. Which brings me to the Patreon. Oh boy, the Patreon! Look, I'm not against creators making money for what they create, but there comes a time when it's basically just committing fraud, whether by not delivering on rewards, or misrepresenting your need for the money, or just being a bad value proposition, or all 3 just for some variety. For the low price of $300 a month, they promised Skype chats with an alter and just flat out didn't deliver. I found a bunch of comments from people who straight up did not receive their agreed upon patron rewards. I'm sure they realized that not delivering on Skype chats was gonna be bad PR, so they did the sensible thing, replace the awful value tier with something less bad. Now you get the privilege of paying Gucci prices for a brain logo hoodie every 3 months. And this is supposedly necessary because
We make at least one thing a month that is suggested by our patrons, and that's really helpful for us because it helps keep a roof over our heads.
And again, the rewards just weren't being sent out to people. In June, there was a Patreon post talking about, yeah, we suspended Patreon rewards for mental health reasons. People were overdrawing their bank accounts under the impression that they were helping to prevent a YouTube person that they genuinely cared about from starving. And it was immoral and irresponsible for DissociaDID to let this go on despite being quote-unquote on break. Well, on break enough to not address any racism controversy, but not enough to stop meticulously scrubbing comments. But I digress. Even though she exploited people for their money for months, she still has the audacity to plug the Patreon every other community tab post. I don't know anyone who does all of that in good conscience, but I suppose that's just business first people for you. Speaking of business first, DissociaDID just wasn't anywhere near as big at the beginning of the year. Only about 300,000 subs, which is a mid-sized channel relatively speaking, but the channel more than doubled in size in about a month, and here's why. That's right, half of Good Smosh. Actually, I should probably step back just a little bit. Originally, the British DID tuber in that video wasn't supposed to be DissociaDID. It was supposed to be Multiplicity and me, a much more responsible and honest YouTuber who I recommend watching. She had worked with a casting agency and was working on going stateside for the video. Because this was in March, before all the fallout, DissociaDID got word of this interview and did what is legally considered to be the most. She went and figured out which casting agency Padilla was working with at the time, found someone's email, and in effect told them that she'd pay for everything just to make everything simple and fast and vacation-y, i.e. going behind Multiplicity and me's back. Then naturally, flexing it on Insta. The interview itself went about how you'd expect. Anthony talks to the people in the videos, asks a few questions, looks uncomfortable, and she switches a lot, but that's about it. It's not particularly notable anyways, but it was really good for growth. According to my sources / scriptwriters, seeing the interview with half of Good Smosh and being inspired, Trisha Paytas, nope! Alright, look, I'm gonna save you a few hours and tell you this part isn't actually important for my video, so go find someone else's summary after you finish this video, and subscribe and follow me on Twitter. Anyway, flashback over. So like I was saying, this controversy was extremely good for growth. March saw a gain of almost 330,000 subscribers, and I guarantee you an impressive amount of cash as well. And then the thing with the pedophile partner happened, but I really don't want to tack an extra 20 minutes onto this video to explain that, so you can go watch someone else's. Whew, I'm so glad I'm not the one that has to take that whole mess on. But these are only some of the things about DissociaDID that I discovered while researching. I must say, I am consistently shocked by the DissociaDID system's sheer audacity. For their current trick, which is literally going on right now, they're trying to get away with not addressing anything by coming back with a fundraiser. Deflecting from controversy by doing a fundraiser or pointing to insert suddenly noticed injustice here is like the YouTuber version of admitting to the crime. And what a fundraiser it is. For the low price of you paying money, you get to submit art via Patreon for a contest. Now, the winner gets to pay Nin to take the rights to their artwork. DissociaDID merch is supposed to be made with the winning design, and the proceeds are supposed to be donated to charity. Honestly, I just can't trust it, especially not after all the earlier sketchy behavior with their Patreon. The whole thing just screams scam, and honestly, if you can't see it, well, come on down to JJ's Forex Emporium. For the low price of $300 a month, you'll learn the secrets of trading. You're broke and jobless? $300 and you'll be balling. You're an engineer making $200,000 a year? Your 9 to 5 is corny, dog. We make millions in our sleep. So if you too are eager to part with your money, you might want to come on down to JJ's Forex Emporium. Also, it's fun, by using the JJ's Forex Emporium service, you refund the forfeiture of half of any profits to JJ plus your entire soul if things go poorly. Anyways, back to the video. This should be enough for you to understand what I'm saying about her behavior, right? At this point, I'm in serious danger of turning into a CinemaSins ripoff. So let me cut straight to my big, controversial claim. Chloe's faking. You can't just say that! That's irresponsible and Nah, I said what I said. I believe that the owner of the channel is faking having dissociative identity disorder, and here's why. First of all, it's impressive that a person who supposedly has such radically different alters would be able to consistently record, edit, and post videos. By consistently, I mean weekly. Plus, formally run a podcast. It's still up on Spotify, for now. Of course, this could just mean that all her ultras are remarkably good at communication, which is impressive and makes her an outlier and not at all representative of most people with DID. But I have my doubts that she's truly just that special because she mines other people's traumas and inner worlds and makes them her own. I've seen multiple people mention this on Reddit. She acts all concerned about a person's well-being and tries to get detailed information, and that person's backstory is now suddenly hers. There's even documentation of her attempting it with a person on Facebook. There's just something fundamentally wrong with that. Not only are people being manipulated by a figure that they respect and they think they can trust, I can imagine that it's somewhat distressing and traumatizing for details of your personal life and trauma that you shared with someone else in confidence to be broadcast to an audience of over 1 million people. And it's not like you can just mention it to other people because either your comment will get deleted or you'll get comments like this from her stans. Side note, for the record, the quote-unquote switches that she does on camera are completely and totally overdone. However, this isn't evidence for or against her having DID, as other DID tubers have admitted to dramatizing switches in the past. We all do things for content sometimes, and people with DID are apparently no exception. It's just usually they don't have diagnoses as sketchy as hers. I did a little research, and it turns out that DID takes a while to diagnose. Because it's a disorder with a lot of symptoms that are similar to other dissociative disorders, it requires regular visits to multiple psychiatrists, lots of tests, and of course observation. The psychiatrists might even take up to a year, just to be sure. In her case, this didn't happen. She's given 3 versions of the story that don't line up. Sometimes a nurse recommended the diagnosis to her, sometimes she taught a nurse about what DID is, and much more frequently,
We were diagnosed by Dr. Remy Acrone of the Pottergate Centre. He runs and directs the treatment centre for dissociation and trauma survivors.
Keep in mind that none of these people are actually qualified to give a mental health diagnosis, and Mr. Acrone here is not a licensed psychiatrist. He just exists to give people the diagnoses that they paid for. He works at the Pottergate Center for Dissociative Diseases, which isn't actually a hospital. More on that later. Okay, this last one is kind of minor, and I can't find the screenshots that prove this, so I understand if you don't want to trust me on this. Having said that, in the video that introduced me to this whole channel, Chloe says that she can, and I quote, bring forward different ultras using Spotify playlists that were all made on the same day, and all updated on the same days thereafter. You can start to see where the cracks in this might be, right? Unfortunately though, I'm not the only person to notice this. She did too, so in advance of her big comeback, she decided to either delete or private all the playlists in an attempt to bypass any scrutiny that this may have caused. I'm sorry I couldn't dig any of these screenshots up, but I know what I saw, and you're just gonna have to trust me on this. Okay, honestly, I can't say that she's faking or not for certain. I hope that I'm just being a horrible person by mistakenly calling someone out for faking. I hope this part of the video looks terrible in hindsight. I truly do hope that I'm just barking up the wrong tree here. I'm not a psychiatrist, and people absolutely do have mental health struggles, and I do not want to invalidate those. However, even if Nin/Chloe's DID is real, the character of DissociaDID is almost certainly a fiction made up for the camera. The whole channel is performance art, almost a caricature of a person with DID. The ultras are all radically different and seem to fulfill various tropes and stereotypes. Furthermore, as you watch the channel, you get a sort of impression that living with DID is easy, and it's basically just having a bunch of head friends trademark. Never do you ever see any insight into what her real struggles have been or can be, besides when Nin/Chloe is asking for money or avoiding responding to criticism. I do not believe that this is healthy for either people who want to know more about the disorder or people who suffer from it. Remember the Pottergate Center? I did some minor digging, and when I tell you that Pottergate Center is sketch, I mean it. First of all, they're a bit pay for diagnosis, as they don't follow best practices. One of the most important things in diagnosing a psychiatric disorder is that the psychiatrist doesn't implant ideas or false memories, or reveal details of tests before making an actual diagnosis. Because, well, the mind is a powerful thing, and a particularly incompetent or malicious psychiatrist can implant false memories, or convince someone that they have a diagnosis that they don't actually have. This is how it's supposed to work. But at Pottergate, they literally sell the answers to the tests on their website. You honestly cannot make this stuff up. Like, who does that while claiming to be a reputable source of diagnosis and or treatment? And you'd think that would be shady enough, but nope, they're associated with other shady groups like First Person Plural. Now, First Person Plural is, well, I can't say that much about them on their own, because I can't find any information on their website. They are linked to Pottergate though, which ain't great. And on top of that, a couple of their associates are questionable at best without any answers. I'm gonna start with the international International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, or ISSTD for short. ISSTD is a group that's been controversial in the past for really bad psychiatric care. In fact, they have been sued successfully for ruining people's lives. A lot of their care was, in fact, the implantation of false memories of trauma, which not only propagated conspiracy theories similar to the ones that we have to deal with today, but led to many people being estranged from their families and psychologically damaged due to events that simply did not happen. The next group on the list, Ritual Abuse Information Network and Support, or RAINS for short, does similar things, but is also worse. During the 90s, there was a bit of a moral panic and people were very concerned, somewhat irrationally at that, about a big child trafficking ring going on. They really wanted to hashtag save our children. So, in order to do this, RAINS lobbied the government to the point where they actually launched an investigation. Predictably, the government didn't find anything, so RAINS took the work in-house, creating lists of people, including names, nicknames, and home addresses that they believed were in on the conspiracy. Fun fact, this list was being actively maintained even in 2018. For an organization that had so much to say, they were remarkably ineffective at actually proving their claims, although they did cause a bunch of kids to be removed from their houses for no reason, and created false memories of abuse in people who were just seeking treatment. And this did ruin lives. Look no further than the story of Carole Felstead, who was manipulated into believing that her family was abusive, and so separated from them. She even wrote notes and statements that said that her parents and family were, and I quote, abusive in every way, despite, and I've taken this directly from a Guardian article, having a happy childhood and being one of the popular kids. Through no fault of her own, except unwittingly visiting the wrong therapist, starting in her 20s, she lived a bad life filled with self-harm and trauma symptoms based entirely on false pretenses, culminating in her taking her own life at 41. Clearly, organizations with messages and aims like this have a very real potential to ruin lives, especially if they haven't shown any signs of reform. One of RAINS' founders, Valerie Sineson, is even on ISSTD's board, and DissociaDID is supporting them. Honestly, I'd like to assume that she didn't do the research, but I'm done giving her the benefit of the doubt. And you know why? Because she has a pattern of being dishonest and manipulative. It makes perfect sense that she'd be associated with charities like this. I'd say it doesn't matter, but it would be an awful thing for someone to go from watching interesting YouTube videos to being another Carole Felstead. DissociaDID's gotta go. The channel as a whole is a hotbed for misinformation, and not the harmless infographic show factoid type, but things that, if taken at face value, make the road to healing for trauma survivors that much longer, and misconstrue the nature of mental illnesses, especially DID, for those of us who are unfamiliar. This may cause actual harm to other victims of trauma. I think that it's highly unfortunate that when one looks for a channel by someone with DID, that chances are they'll find DissociaDID videos first and never dig deeper. There are much better channels that cover many of the same topics and have more accurate and honest representations of the disorder, and the educational ones actually research and educate, unlike some people. Plus, Nin/Chloe has left a trail of hurt people in her wake. Former friends that she used for clout, people who gave her money under false pretenses, patrons who never got their rewards, and people of color who never got a satisfactory response to her racism. She used to use the "but I have a black friend" excuse, and even had the audacity to, "yeah, well, our life matters too" them. Wait, did she really? Yeah, she did. How do I delete somebody else's channel again? Postscript time! It turns out that after some introspection, DissociaDID's finally decided to come clean and hashtag leave it in 2020, making a post addressing all the allegations of racism and misinformation and other things, and vowing to do better. Wait, no, they said that everything is either out of context or not their fault. Trust them. Just pretend that it doesn't exist. Oh, and also don't do any digging into what was deleted and why, or comment about it, because that's toxic and will be removed. I mean, the apology is fine, I guess. I mean, the video should clear things up for everyone and... Oh wait, this is an Instagram story. They're really trying to dodge responsibility by hiding everything behind their platform with the least amount of followers. Sounds about right. I mean, at least we didn't get a Shaggy defense. It wasn't me. Anyways, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. If you'd like to see more from me, please make sure you subscribe and check through my other videos. Also, you should follow me on Twitter so that I don't go 3 months between uploads again. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.